June meeting. Thank you for attending. We've got a representative from Powys County Council who's observing today, and I've just been informed, Councillor Williams, you do sit on housing, children and care in Powys. Good luck, and thank you for your hard work for all constituents in Powys. And you'd like to ask some questions at the end. So what we'll do is, if members are happy, we'll close the meeting down then, and Angela spend 5-10 minutes with us just asking some questions. Okay? That's all right. I'm going to move the agenda around today, okay? So we're going to do 7 and 9 after the minutes of agenda item number 4. Hazel is going to disappear for about 3, just gone. Everybody's happy with that. So we'll get straight into the agenda. To note the appointment of Councillor Simon Howarth as Select Committee Chair for today's meeting. Everybody happy with that? Yeah, okay. Apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair.
Okay. Apologies for absence, Richard.
Yes, Chair. Apologies from Councillors Woodhouse, Dimmock and Pavia.
Okay, thank you. Declarations of interest as and when? Yeah, okay. And then agenda item number 4, to confirm the minutes of the Joint Select Committee meeting, Adults, Children, Young People, on the 20th of March 2018. The minutes are there to be signed as a true and accurate record. Everybody happy with that? Yeah, okay. Any questions from them minutes? Anybody got any questions? No? Okay, we do have actions also further on from the joint meeting, so everybody's happy with that. Right, okay, we're going to move then number 7 to next on the agenda, and then we're going to discuss number 9 and 7 now. Everybody happy with that? Yep. We'll do 7 first then. So number 7 is the discussion on health and scrutiny topics. The Select Committee to identify area for future scrutiny with the Health Board. First of all, I have 2 things I need to inform you about, which I've had one file from a constituent in Monmouthshire sent to me, reference to the decision made on Saint-Pierre. As we all know, that's a controversial decision for this council and for constituents of Monmouthshire. I've had a file sent to me from a member of the public, and I just wanted to let you know about that file. It's quite a large file, and I discussed this with Hazel, and I'm going to inform the member of the public now that I've notified this committee, and as a member of the public he will be allowed to come here, or she, to discuss what is sent to me. Okay, there's a lot of private stuff in there, so it's going to be his option then of what or she want to do with that. Okay, I won't discuss the file this moment in time as reference to that confidentiality. That's up to him. So he may come, he may not, or she or he may not come. I'll leave it with them, but he did say to me, could I inform committee that I'd sent this file? And also I'd had an email from a constituent now, but it was a former employee of this authority, reference to a matter which had arisen to do with information. That matter had been resolved in the circle of how it should have been resolved. Whether the member of the public now was happy with that decision, but it's been resolved. But they did make some valid points about what had been discussed and how they got to A to B to C, which I did take on board. I answered the member of the public then through Hazel with a response, but I thought it was addressed to me as chairman of the committee, so I thought you should know about that also. It was very important, and I do know now some members would like to actually probably have a slight discussion around the topic of where that information instigated from, and I think it's important as well that we do that as members of the council. During pre-meeting we did discuss as well, we can also use other avenues if you do feel that something within the remit of this select committee needs to go further, or you believe that you are being pressurised from different directions. There are avenues to take. So it's not just select. You can go to audit, or you can perhaps even go to full council with a motion or even a question. So please be aware that there are lots of channels you can go down, and that's important as members. We use them channels also. So Hazel, we're going to go to number 7 there. I know we've had another observer from Powys arrive with us. And when I have a minute now, I'll just introduce that member of the public. Hazel, do you just want to run through older adults' mental health and the care closer to home, please?
Yes, I need to leave at 3, Chair. So we agreed to take the work programme slightly earlier, and the things for you to be aware of is that the next meeting on the 10th of July is really full. We can't add to that agenda. I don't think it wouldn't be feasible. So you're looking at a special meeting really to discuss what you'd like to discuss with the Health Board, which is older adults' mental health services. And care closer to home. So I've put some dates to the Health Board, and I'm looking for a response from them. But the idea would be to have a special meeting, hopefully in the first 3 weeks of July. So I'll let the committee know as soon as I've got a date, but it's not going to be possible to work around individual people's diaries, I'm afraid. It's very difficult to secure a date with the people that we need here to have the discussions you want to have. Okay, Chair?
Yeah, okay. And the other one is the care closer to home and how this sits within Monmouthshire's integrated services. Okay? Yep, okay. Everybody happy with that? Any questions? No. Right, let's go to number 9 then. Adult Select Committee Forward Work Programme. That was it? Okay. Somebody wanted... We've had issues reference to... Councillor Brown, yeah.
Yeah, Chair, I don't know whether I should declare an interest or not, because the person concerned, I know as an acquaintance, but I'm really raising this as sort of a matter of principle in terms of, nothing to do with employment or anything like that, but really to do with the access to over 18 records in adult care, and the fact that there's an A to Z system of access, unlike other areas, there doesn't seem to be enough data security in relation to this. Now, I've been told that effectively this has been looked at and it's all been resolved and sorted. But the problem is that we have no information whatsoever on that. So, in terms of the agenda, I would like to see a report on access to over 18 social care records and data protection, and how we're ensuring the security of records of people, and what measures we've taken in relation to the Information Commissioner. And I have emailed the Chief Officer about this particular issue, but I've only had a very generalised response, which doesn't really provide the level of detail to reassure me that these issues have been fully resolved, and whether we've got the best system in comparison, for example, with other local authorities. And because it can't be right that in a care home there's an A to Z system and anybody can access anybody's records. And I don't know the ins and outs of how the NHS deal with it, but for example, they may have to put in the person's name and date of birth so that they only recall, one particular record rather than have access to all of them. And I don't think necessarily signing confidentiality agreement that gets over this particular issue. So I think it is of concern, because you don't want to be in a situation where your work colleagues can access any of your relatives' records, particularly if you've got a surname that's not Jones or something like that, that's easily identifiable. So I do think it's an issue of principle, and I think it's our role as a scrutiny committee to get that reassurance and to look into that particular detail, and then if we're not happy, to refer that to council to look at further. And I do think it's a very important issue for people. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Brown, that has touched on something which I had the email about, and it may be revolving round that. Julie, you're with us, which is great, because over 18s was mentioned there as head lead for adults. Would you like to make any comments on that, please?
I'm happy to comment. Clearly, I'm aware of the source of the question. I think it's a very important point, and I do think there's a big context around this in terms of sensitivity of data, about how we operate and have operated for many years as an adult social care system, who accesses that information within that system, and how those systems work. Interestingly, I suppose we have been subject to a number of inquiries around this matter, both from the Information Commissioner's Office on a number of occasions, which has allowed us really to sort of reflect and review where we are, and actually place in front of the Information Commissioner the systems that we have in place. Each time the Information Commissioner has come back and said that they're satisfied with those arrangements. I think it's also worthy of note that obviously the new GDPR regulations, which trips off everybody's tongue at the moment, have allowed another window of opportunity to sort of reflect and review where we are. It's fair to say that there's been quite a bit of work going on for a little bit of time, really, looking at our server systems, the way we file our information, and looking at the system that we've got, migrating to other systems that potentially may be of assistance. And we have done some of that work in collaboration with other areas. More than happy to bring some, paper or presentation or something to committee that I suppose explains the context within which we operate in adult social care, and how information is accessed, how we safeguard and provide governance around that for our staff, and how when you work in a adult and a children's system, there is a lot of reliance on confidentiality and a lot of reliance through both supervision team meetings and non-disclosure agreements. All those things we've had to look at again in response to GDPR particularly, and we have a set of action plans at the moment that are working through that. I am satisfied that those things are robust. There are always things that we can improve on, and certainly one of the areas that we're particularly interested in looking at is how you observe what is being observed. So at the moment, people can access information and are entitled to it to access that information. But how would we know who has accessed what? And so we're looking at whether there's a system that can, and some areas do have that system, which is a bit of an audit that says this person looked here on this date. I think it's fair to say that there isn't a discrimination between professional and care work. It is that everybody who works within the system that needs information in order to do their job should have access to that information. So that is a principle for us that actually we've got to refresh and look at and say, that I think that still stands the test of time. But more than happy to bring, in a sense, I suppose it's context around how we do it, how it's always been in place, what GDPR in effect does to that now, and whether there's anything else that needs to be upgraded or changed as a result of that.
Members, could I just stop? Sorry, Louise. Would it be within our interests as this we're not talking about a case here or anything. What we're talking about the topic of process. Would it be with our interests as a committee then, as a select, just a couple of members go through it with yourselves and then report back to us here and see whether you're happy? Because there'd be lots of questions members will have to you, Julie, about what we have in place, and it may be there's something that we think, oh, that's a decent idea, or yeah, that'd be great. Would members be happy to do that? And Louise or whoever, go along and go through it all, spend a few hours or whatever, going through what the process we have. And if you feel that you need to report back to us, then you come back to us and inform. We as a select set up a group of 2, perhaps, just to go through it. How long would you be? Perhaps a couple of meetings to go through what we have in place and whether it needs any tweaking or whatever, Julie. How long would we be?
In terms of looking at the system?
Yeah.
It wouldn't take that long.
A session, perhaps 2 to just finalise it all.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, if I think in terms of looking at the operating system that we operate and understanding where that sits, that's not a very big piece of work to show both the what we call the case management system flow, and then the server system, which is the, if you like, the electronic file system, and understand how that is accessed, and then the action plans that are around that.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I think
Louise.
that would be useful, but I think we would also want a formal report, because from what's being said, my concern is that the actual computing system should be able to be more security based, so that you have to put the name of a person and their date of birth, and you don't just have an A to Z list. And regardless of confidentiality agreements, I think that's a basic requirement, because if the system doesn't currently note who's accessed what, then the system itself is not secure enough, in my view.
But you've just written the report, Louise. Jane and Ruth.
I mean, obviously this may be an isolated case, but there have been some very high-profile cases in the press in South Wales recently, both on the police computer, I think, and the health computer. And I think that our residents want reassurance, and I would like to know exactly what checks are in place and what actually happens. And I think that's what Louise is saying. We actually need to report back to our communities on how their data is used, how it's stored, and how people access it. It's just as simple as that, really.
Ruth?
Thank you, Chair, because I think we're quite fortunate in Monmouthshire that we haven't had any disaster happen, and because it's only in the papers where a child has slipped through the net because one office didn't say anything to the other one. And I suppose human error is always going to be somewhere, but I think luckily in Monmouthshire we've been very careful with that sort of thing. But there again, we do need to share things, because it could mean preventing a child dying or being injured and all that. So, I think we have to give faith into and trust in the system that we have got. And we are all well aware of the consequences if we are not up to scratch on it all. Thank you.
Okay, Ruth, thanks. Julie, just want to respond?
Yeah, just thinking about what might be useful in terms of understanding the whole pathway. I think it would, it's a suggestion, but some sort of workshop where we actually involve the information governance people, we involve some of our staff, our workers, as it were, and actually use some sort of what I'd call dummy case trial, so that you actually get to see the whole system and understand which bits of our service access which bits, and get that overall picture, really, because this is it's a whole system around adult services, and also understand perhaps the amount of people that are accessing that. There's a big context around this, and then look at possibly where we've identified that there are gaps, which we always do, and also if there's anything that needs to be tidied up, plus the stuff that we're working on as a result of GDPR and other things. We could probably get quite a bit into a couple of hours with the right people in the room to allow that sort of interrogation, really.
Okay,
yeah,
Julie.
could I suggest, Chair, that that's an open meeting, in terms of as we have this webcast, and members of the public are allowed to come along if they're interested in the background of it, because
Can I say, I think this has been raised because people aren't happy or don't believe perhaps we've got the best things in place. I think the senior officers made it quite clear that we are tweaking it all the time, and what I believe, and I think this raised, is members actually should have a look at this, because if members want an understanding of how it all works, is personally we should, one or two, go and have a look and report back to us here and say, right, yes, we've had a look at it, yeah, understand it, yeah, we feel things aren't whatever, and it's an honest opinion, or we believe, and use an example of something else as well, and just do a report and come back here. And if it takes 3 or 4 hours to go through the whole system and get somebody mentioned the police there or whatever, see what another authority's using and see whether it's fit for purpose, report back here, tick the box, we're fine. If we're not happy, we can send it further up the pile, then involve the cabinet member or whatever, or what direction you want to do. And I feel personally that may be the best way. If we're asking officers to do all that, I believe officers have probably responded, which I've received emails, etc., to issues which have arisen. And if people still aren't happy about that, go and look at the system, and if you feel you've got questions, you're not happy about something, bring it back here. And I think that we as a council, and don't take this wrong, officers sitting there, don't always take the officer's word for it that the system is bomb-proof. He may, I mean, we are councillors, we're representatives, you made it very clear there. We represent the 90,000 out there. Let's make sure we've got the right system in place. Let's use a crossover authority to see whether we are better than them or we aren't as good as them, what systems we've got in place. That is the way to do it. And that's up to you as members whether you want to go down that route. Councillor Blakeborough.
Thanks, Chair. I think Louise is absolutely right to bring it here for discussion, because obviously if we're concerned that data is unsafe, it is our responsibility to look at it. I hear what the officer is saying, that the Commissioner is satisfied and the level of processes in place in response to the GDPR. I'm just wondering, in terms of the process, is the Audit Committee the best place to look at process to make sure it is safe? And again, I take on Louise's point, because it's about ethics and good practice, not necessarily just meeting the basic standards. But I don't think it's our job to suggest what alternatives should be put in place, but to raise it, we're concerned, could somebody check the process and come back to us to say that it is safe? So I'm just wondering if audit might be the best place to take that process forward.
I think to understand what systems we have in place, I think it's the most important thing to understand it, and that's my view is we can have a workshop, which is great, but to go and understand how it works and whether there are flaws in it is most important. Louise, you want to come back in?
Yeah, I think it's actually a job of this committee, because my concern, right, Chairman, is to make sure that if we do, a couple of members do go along and have a look at the system, it's important that we report back and possibly have a further report to this committee, because it is for adults, it is records over 18, it is our responsibility, and I don't think it's necessarily something that audit, because obviously I've been on audit committees and they don't, it's sort of, they don't give you much detail about what it is. I mean, they just say whether or not they've got a certain level of assurance with it. And so I think it's important for our residents that this is open and transparent, and that we've looked at it. And if there are suggestions that can go forward to improve the system that we've got, then we should be in a position to do that, but we need to do it in an open and transparent way. And unfortunately, Audit Committee I don't think is the right committee for that, because it's our job to scrutinise things to do with adults, and audit does not produce any detail. It just says what the level of assurance is. So, you know, I mean, that's a surefire way to just bury it. And, you know, I don't want that to happen in this case.
Okay, Louise, you've just talked yourself in with anybody else. Anybody else like to join Louise and have a session? There you go, Councillor Jane Pratt. Okay. Okay, yeah. You two, are we agreeing with that as select? Yeah, okay. We're agreeing that 2 members, Councillor Pratt and Councillor Brown, will be chaperoned by officers to look at the systems we have in place and to report back to this select committee at the earliest convenience.
And to cover things like agency staff, because, you know, it's a minefield, it's a massive...
Don't let's not get bogged down in this, because I think Louise is at the point there. Have we got a system in place which is fit for purpose? Officers are saying we have. Let's double check that, Louise. And also, your direction needs to be brought back to this committee to make sure you are happy with Jane when you report back. Small report saying we've done X, Y, A, B, C, and then everybody will be happy then. And if you're not happy, you say in the report. Councillor Ruth Edwards. Okay, can I leave that with yourselves and the senior officer to put something together in whenever's available for everyone? Okay? Okay? Right, thank you. Let's move on.
Chair, can I just remind everybody that one of our visitors is a little hard of hearing, so please can you all speak into your microphones, make sure that you're using your microphones and that you're actually speaking into it when you are. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure she can hear me. All right, thank you. What's your name, please?
Jackie Charlton.
Jackie Charlton. Jackie Charlton. Oh, I know you. I might have known your brother, Jackie Charlton, the footballer. Yeah, well, England, isn't it?
My husband's called Bobby.
Well done. Councillor Charlton, what committees are you on in Powys?
We're on, well, both Ange and I are on
Housing, Children and Care.
Yeah,
okay.
So we're on this health care. We're both on audit as well. So
okay, welcome to Monmouthshire County Council, and I'm going to have 5-10 minutes once we close the meeting. The councillor has some questions for us also, so you may have some as well, okay? Right, let's move on then. We've done number 7. Right. Chris Robinson. We have number 5, supporting people's programme grant. Chris is just going to give us a quick overview. He said 5 minutes, so I'll hold him to that. No, sorry, Chris, it was 8, wasn't it?
I said 7, you said 5.
Okay, we'll compromise, we'll make it 6. Away you go, Chris.
Good afternoon. The purpose of the paper I put to you today is twofold. First and foremost was to update you about an uncertain funding situation we've got in supporting people. And the second sort of idea was that the last time I was in front of Select, they asked for a bit more detail around the outcomes that supporting people was achieving, what sort of people we were providing support to. And then the last part is, I think, a number of members are new to Select Committee and may or may not know anything about supporting people. So I put into my presentation a little bit about the history of supporting people, as opposed to just going through the notes from the report, if that's okay with you. So the purpose of supporting people is to enable vulnerable people to gain and retain independence by remaining in their own homes. That's the basic purpose of the whole programme. It came about by a number of legal challenges in 1999-2000, where local authorities were abusing housing benefits. Government picked this up and decided they needed to do something different about it and provide a different means of funding support. And out of that, in 2003, came the Supporting People programme. And Wales, being Wales, did it slightly differently to England. And split supporting people into two income streams: supporting people programme grant, which was for longer term projects and was money that was managed by local authorities, and supporting people revenue grant, which was to fund short-term services and was managed directly between Welsh Government and the providers. There was a lot of duplication going on. In 2010, Aylward was asked to review supporting people, and he came up with a number of suggestions, one of which was that there had to be one single funding stream, the Supporting People Programme Grant, and that it was about time that the programme measured what it did in terms of outcomes. So in 2012-13, Supporting People Programme Grant was introduced, as was the recording of outcomes. That went on until 2017, where Carl Sargent said he wanted to start introducing some flexibility between different funding streams and allowed 15% of supporting people, Families First, Flying Start, and Communities First to be moved between the four streams, and that was partially successful. Some local authorities managed to do some of that. But in 2018, they introduced the idea of this early intervention, prevention and support pilot, which is commonly known as Super Grant. And 7 local authorities are pathfinding that at the moment, where there are 10 or 11 grant pots being put into one pot, and the local authority has the ability to decide how it's going to allocate those funds to the different initiatives. The only proviso being is the expectation that supporting people will not go down in terms of value. So where 15% are in, where people are moving funds around between initiatives, the expectation is that supporting people is likely to get more funds rather than less. If any supporting people goes to other funding initiatives, you have to go back to Welsh Government and get permission. So at the moment, Monmouthshire is not one of the pathfinders. We're allowed to move 15% between Families First, Flying Start and supporting people. So at the moment, we're in a cusp. We don't know where we're going to go in terms of funding later on this year, and I'll come on to that again in a second. I'll try and whip through this a bit quickly. The journey is basically back in 2003, Monmouthshire was getting £2.8 million of supporting people. If you bring that forward to present day value, that's equivalent to about just over £4 million. At the moment, we actually received £2 million. There have been quite significant efficiencies. Back in 2003, there were 5 staff, and now we're down to 2 staff. So there are business efficiencies associated with what we've been doing. Before Aylward review in 2011-12, that just showed you there's £140,000 that went into the council's revenue grant for administration and management, and it's quite important to remember that, because that is one of the basic differences between supporting people and all the other grant schemes. All the other grant schemes, the administration and management comes out of the grant pot. Supporting people, it doesn't. That's already been allocated to the council's revenue grant, and we can't use any of the SP grant fund for administration and management, which is an issue for us in the future. So if you look, the present day value of SP funding from 2011-12 has been going down steadily. Obviously, the monies have been staying the same, but also the present day value has been going down. And interestingly, we are actually delivering more outcomes to roughly the same number of people, but effectively with less funding. I put in there just to show how things are changing. At the present time, the people with mental health issues are our biggest client group that we support. If you go back to 2012, they weren't. There's been a significant change there. Similarly, people over 55, go back in 2012, we had a number of services which were aimed directly for older people. But if you look at tenancy support, the tenancy support for an older person is actually very similar to somebody who's not older. So we have moved those services away from being age restrictive to actually having tenure and age neutral services, which is now and we were probably ahead of the guidelines for supporting people. That's now an expectation within the guidelines. Interestingly, I'll just pick out one. Domestic abuse has come up considerably in the number of people we support. And the basic reason behind that is, whilst the refuge service is still the same, we're providing a lot of more information and sort of floating support, hands-on, quick support solutions to a lot of people in a crisis situation, which we didn't do back in 2012. And the next one is actually demonstrates how successful we're involved in the place-based model of providing support in Monmouthshire. Now, the people, you'll see there's been a significant increase in the number of people with physical and sensory disabilities. And that's because we now have more support workers out in the communities. And these people who were previously actually hidden or had difficulty to access services have suddenly we've become aware of and are getting the services. And that's actually been a major success. So the average person we're supporting has, it works towards about 4 out of the 11 outcomes the programme has. In terms of the cost, each outcome has 5 steps, and each step of progress costs around about £300. Now, I think we're the only local authority that's actually putting a value on these things, so it's quite difficult to benchmark. But where I've looked at other people in Gwent, that is actually good value. And certainly the Welsh Government reports on our performance suggest that they see what we're doing as good value. The other thing that our analysis shows is we're putting quite a bit of emphasis on intervention and prevention. And when you look at the cost of progress in terms of outcomes from intervention and prevention services, they're about a quarter of the cost of the other services, really cost effective. And it's probably showing us a way to go. So for performance, one of the anomalies in supporting people is generic floating support. Go back in 2012, that would be assigned the lead support need of a number of people, and we've gone away from that now. So generic floating support is a method of providing support, not a client categorisation. And so a lot of the people who were categorised as needing generic floating support would now say their lead need is mental health or a learning disability, or it might be an age issue. So we've changed that around. But having generic floating support is really important in terms of the equalities. We don't have enough funding to provide services for each protected characteristic or subgroup of the protected characteristics. But by having floating support in a generic sense, we can offer floating support to anybody who presents with needs. I'm going on, sorry. So at the moment, Monmouthshire's SP is developing the place-based service. We're providing support based on need, not on where people are living and not on their age. What's really important to see is that actually the services, the needs of people we're providing services to, they're quite complex. They have a number of support needs, and they're working on a number of outcomes to progress from. And for the future, we can see that we will need to up our services in relation to providing support over welfare reform and universal credits. That's an underlying problem for a lot of people. Homelessness prevention is an issue that we probably need to supplement, and mental health, people with mental health issues, that's the biggest client group that we support. and we don't actually fund that proportionately. So I suspect in the fullness of time we need to address that. Now, the purpose of, now going on to the purpose of the report, sorry Chair, I'm probably taking too much time. The issue is that the government have introduced this idea of the super grant, and they're piloting with pathfinders. At the moment, they're saying, well, this is just a pilot. We haven't decided whether we're going to do this or not. We'll probably make up our minds towards the end of the year. And very recent developments, even since I wrote the paper, the last National Advisory Group meeting for the Minister, it seems that there are two camps now. One is for people who prefer all these grant funds to be put into one pot to give people greater flexibility. The other one is to say there are some grants within those pots that are housing related, and that's supporting people, homelessness grant, this supported accommodation review monies, put those into one pot, and that's comes out of one directorate, and then out of another directorate, the funds relating to tackling poverty, and it solves some of the complications about having one grant delivered by two different portfolios in Welsh Government. On top of that, at the moment, we're also going through a process at the moment where Gwent is looking at the option of regionalising supporting people. I think the general understanding is there is a minority opinion of one local authority who would like to see that happen, and like to see it happen probably by some sort of social enterprise. The rest of the Gwent local authority's opinion is they probably prefer to have the flexibility associated with either the one or the two fund streams. Welsh Government have already announced that there will be a reduction in, if you look at the whole early intervention prevention support portfolio, that budget will reduce. But at the same time, they've said they'll guarantee supporting people, which is a bit weird and it's causing great uncertainty. And the other thing that they have said is they're going to increase childcare, and the childcare pilots are already running, and that's going to account for another £20 million, and that comes out of the pot. Where's it coming from? So for us at this moment, we don't know what's coming down the line in terms of where we're going to get our funding from. Is supporting people going to be part of housing or part of something else? Sorry, did? No, I'm just... Oh, sorry. When you finished, I'd like to ask... Oh, sorry. Sorry, okay, Chris. Yeah, quickly. But for me, for supporting people in Monmouthshire, I'm really enthusiastic about... but I would really like the one flexible pot. But if there are two, and the abilities to move funds between the two, great. I think there's a great opportunity to work much more collaboratively across Flying Start, Families First, and the bigger grant pots. There are definitely some business efficiencies to be had, because a lot of these funding initiatives have their own administration and management teams. And there's got to be some way of making that a much more efficient way. I think there's an opportunity of moving towards the idea in the place-based support model of a one-stop support worker, where you have a support worker. At the moment, you've got Mrs. Jones. If I just go on for it, I don't know whether you've seen the place-based frog spawn model before. This is where in each of our communities there's a whole range of support services going into that community. And Mrs. Jones with support needs might have 3, 4 or 5 different types of support workers coming across her front door to provide the support. What makes more sense is probably to have a one-stop support worker who is supported by with specialisms in the background who can provide those supports. So, cutting a long story short, we're in a situation where we don't know, and we won't know until the end of the year, what the funding streams for next year will look like. So on the basis of that, this report is basically saying, because we don't know what's coming, this is an advance warning and seeking your opinion on the proposal that all we do next year to give ourselves time to work through the implications of whatever the funding streams are, we would just extend all our SP contracts in the main next year. And that was the recommendation in the paper and why we went there. I'm sorry, it was a bit rambling, a bit quick.
That's all right, Chris. Right. Councillor Pratt.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And I'll be totally honest with you. I mean, this report I found very in-depth, and it was quite difficult for me to really get my head around it and understand it all. And I think it must be even more difficult for you to try and explain it to us about all these different revenue streams, etc.
It is called the black art.
Yeah. And I have to be honest with you as well. You know, the Welsh Government can talk about all these different pots. At the end of the day, for me as a councillor, it's about whether or not my residents are getting the help that they need. And I'm not convinced that they are. And I say that because I know we can't talk about individual cases, but I've had an incident in my ward, and it was interesting for me that you said that people have been hidden in the community. We've got somebody in her 50s who was only diagnosed on the autistic spectrum at the age of, in her mid-50s very recently. A parent dies, and this person that has been cared for by elderly parents suddenly finds herself in a horrendous situation. She's in a house that's been condemned. There's no sanitary facilities. There's no inside toilet. She has to go outside to use the toilet. She can't cook for herself. She's grossly overweight because she's eating the wrong foods. And it seems to me that there isn't a joined up thinking. I mean, I can see quite clearly what help that lady needs, and I'm just very concerned that with the confusion that we've got at the moment and with all these different people, the other problem there was her social worker went on long-term sick just as this all happened. And when somebody's on an autistic spectrum and this change in their lives is a nightmare, and then for somebody to go in from environmental health and say, oh, actually your house should be condemned. But people are coming up to me in the community and saying, Jane, how is that person still in that house? And I just don't know what the answer is. So I really want to ask you, whilst all this chaos is going on about funding, how long does it take somebody like this person who finds herself in this position, how many months does it take for them to get the right help and for all this joined up? Because from where I'm coming from, that person should not be in that house. So sorry, it's a bit of a long question.
No. I mean, I obviously don't know the case or anything like that, but from what I'm gathering is that there is a social work involvement, right? So that's a care responsibility. Supporting people is not, at the moment, enabled to be part of the care package, right? So and that's right, and that is why I personally am really supportive of the flexible super grant, because it then puts the person absolutely bangs right in the middle of the service and says, Mrs. Jones has a need, we've got these resources, how do we sort her out? And at the moment, it can be me and supporting people say, not us, Gov, certainly not Flying Start, not a family, so it's not families first, it's not communities first, and you're back to, it's only the social worker and third sector perhaps. But if you go forward and then you adopt this super grant idea, for example, one of the best value, best practices things within supporting people is our gateway brokerage system. Everybody comes through that, is assessed, their needs are assessed, prioritised, and sent and forwarded to an appropriate support provider. It isn't a great move to say, let's widen what the gateway can refer to all the community assets in that area. So as soon as we can start thinking super grant, actually changes your thinking. And unfortunately, there's quite a lot of there's a culture change that's got to be in there as well. At the moment, there will be other people like me hugging on to their grant fund like Bullio. And actually, we need to be really concentrating on the Mrs. Joneses of this world and saying, let's do what's best for her and forget about the silo approach. I mean, we were trying earlier this year. We appreciated that welfare reform has caused a lot of hardship and causing a lot of underlying problems, whether it be in all sorts of ways. And our colleagues in Flying Start, Families First, were aware that welfare reform is causing their clients problems. So I said to them, well, your grants you can't spend on supporting people sort their monies out and sort their benefits out. Let's use the 15% for you to commission supporting people to commission some universal credit support workers to do it for you. You'd have thought the world had stopped. Everybody clamped up, no, that's, you can't have any family service or family start. And it's perfectly understandable. We all try to look after our grant, but actually there's a culture change. It's got to come into being with this. And we sort of started the discussions around that now. But just the first steps really, because where there have been problems in the Pathfinders with Supergrant, it's because they haven't had in place the right structure to make those conversations work within the local authority. You've got to have some ground rules for the bun fight to make sure everybody understands what the priorities are, who's funding what and all the rest of it. So that's one of the things. We've got some time and space to put that in place. Whichever way the funding goes, we will be in a better place.
Okay, Chris. Jane, you want to come back?
Can I just come back briefly? I mean, I like the 5-step approach. I thought that was good, and I could see in this particular person's case how she needs that help. 1 point so many hours a week isn't going to do it for that particular situation. But I do think whilst everybody's fighting over their different pots, people aren't getting the help they need, and that is really my worry. And I'm not convinced that this is going to be rectified until you know where your funding's coming from, and I think that's a really serious issue. Thank you, Chair.
Martin.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, just a comment that in the list of your clientele, if you like, who are now receiving support, several of them referred to children and young people. And I think it's a shame that hasn't gone to CYP, only to adults, because I'm sure members of my committee, because I chair CYP, would be interested in hearing about that as well.
I've just said that to the clerk here, that actually there's a little bit of cross-cutting here, and maybe we have a bit of time there, maybe email the report through to your committee and ask them for any comments, and if you want to take the report, then you have the time to take it. I would
certainly welcome the opportunity to take it before my committee.
Okay, Martin.
But then moving on, at our joint CYP and adult meeting yesterday, we received what I thought was a very interesting report from our housing manager about adaptations to buildings to allow people to stay at home. We've just been given a very interesting report now about supporting vulnerable people at home. I know from my own experience, I was really quite ill a few years ago, and before I was let out of hospital to return to my home, I had to work with an OT and persuade an OT service working for the health authority that I was in a position where I could go home. And finally, within my own ward now, working with someone who last year became an amputee, has a 3-bedroomed modern house from Mellin, and can literally only access 3 rooms in it because he's in a wheelchair. And he wants to be independent, and he also says, this is ludicrous, I've got a big house here, I can only use a fraction of it. So there we've got 2 bits of the county council, health and housing, all working in different ways to support people so they can live independent lives in their own homes. It seems to me that we have a public service board which is supposed to be bringing together professionals from a whole range of things to bring people together. And I have to say that looking at the work so far that's been accomplished by the PSB, I don't see it hitting many headlines. And I think this is the sort of area where it really would be ripe to take initiatives like that along and say to housing, to health, this is what we're doing, what are you doing? And let's see if we can all work together. Because really, I think some of the projects that I've heard about are really very, very supportive, but I think we could be doing more. And we're still, to an extent, hidebound by the silo mentality, aren't we? You referred to that yourself. But I think we do really need to move forward, but certainly in the interim, I would support the recommendations in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Martin. Julie, you want to just make a comment there?
Can Chris just say something first?
Okay.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. Children, supporting people isn't able to support children directly. It can support families with children. That being said, since writing this, there's been one initiative where I've got, for the first time, some use of 15% flexibility, and I've managed to secure that with my colleague Ian Bakewell in housing, and he is moving some of his flexible funding into supporting people for us to provide as support for supported lodgings. And as soon as we started talking about that, of course, children's services who have quite a demand for supported lodgings say, what about us? So Ian Bakewell is now talking with Children's Services on that, and I suspect I will have to turn a blind eye to the support worker that I'm commissioning, who will be doing some work in Children's Services. I'm quite happy for that personally, and I haven't said that.
I think, Martin, you've picked up on the graph I was looking at, because I did say to Hazel about perhaps there are cross-cutting issues there. So we've got young people with supporting needs, 16 to 24, 7.3%. Families with support needs, 4%. Single-parent families with support needs, 3%. So there are cross-cutting issues there with families, and where we have children involved, it's cross-cutting because you've got adults and young people. So I do take your point, and I take your point as well, Chris. Perhaps it's something, as I said, we'll just email it through and ask them for any comments. Julie, you wanted to speak, and then I've got Ruth, and then I've got Louise.
I just wanted to, I can completely understand how when you're receiving reports from different, you've got children and young people, got adults committee, etc. I just want to underline that there is a lot of joint working going on. So, for example, disabled facilities grants, our integrated service offer, so our occupational therapists are, very conversant with the disabled facilities grant people in housing. It is much more joined up than perhaps the impression of reports coming forward reporting on different funding streams suggests. So I would just want to give that reassurance really that we very much put the person in the middle and we pull the support around the person in an integrated way, even though it might not look like that when reports are coming through in this way. Just wanted to say that.
Okay.
Can I just say something about that table?
Yes, Kushkan.
Sorry, can I just say something about that table? I mean, there's an awful lot of figures in all of this, and it's quite complicated to work out because people have a lead need, a secondary need, a tertiary need, and all the rest of it. But one of the interesting things is, if you look at families first, supporting people support small families and families first. And actually, if you put then the families that Flying Start support, we still support more than them as well. One thing when you're talking about supporting people is it is the it's the only program I know that covers all the vulnerabilities. And that's a strength and a great and a challenge, as I say, not a weakness, it's a challenge. And I think sometimes the range of client categories that we support gets hidden, and that's a shame, really.
Okay, Chris. Ruth and then Louise.
Thank you, Chris, for that very in-depth report. Takes a while to sort of take it all on board, and we can all understand the pressure that any department is going to be under. The pot is only so big, it only holds just so much money that's been pulled in all directions. And I think also today, expectation of people out there is so much higher than what it used to be. Families aren't what they used to be. Nobody looks after Mrs. Jones, as we are saying, or Granny along the road. Everybody expects so much more for services. And as we tend to find, people don't have a lot to do with the people next door or whatever, that even just that could make a big difference. And I think it's going to be very difficult to spread the money and the services that are expected of the authority. So I think you've got quite a job on your hands, and we have with decision making as well.
Do you have a question?
Can he really see? Sorry, I don't know if this one's working or not.
I've only sort of just started looking about understanding what funding is in these other grants and how they work and all the rest of it. I have in my mind that if we went down the super grant route, there could be of the order of between £300,000 and £400,000 worth of funding that is either being duplicated at the moment or could be used better. So I think there's almost, we can get 10% more support out of what we've got if we do it differently. It's that sort of order. And if you ask me for the proof, for the mathematical proof, I couldn't give it to you. At the moment, it's in there.
Okay. Louise?
Yes, I mean, I think what you're basically advocating is that there's less silos and more integrated working, which would seem to be a sensible solution. And obviously, if you look at table 43 and on page 43 and 44, it talks about the different grants, and obviously the 2 million supporting people and 1.7 million on Flying Start and so forth. But one of the questions, it's obviously this work is important, but you've mentioned about the uncertainties of the grant and wanting to extend it in April 2019 for the various contracts that you've got, which obviously seems sensible. But I mean, I think in view of the uncertainties surrounding it, then, you know, in a sense, there's got to be a bit more flexibility about pots if what we're hoping to happen, you know, that effectively you get at least, if not more, in 2019-20. So I think that the recommendation that we're putting forward, in a sense, also needs to allow for some flexibility of an integrated working in any event, because of the fact of the uncertainties of the funding. Because if you're going for a legal contract that you're extending, then obviously you're extending the council's liabilities, and you know, we don't want to end up obviously with a 2 million gap in the budget as a result. The other thing is I'm also not quite clear whether or not Monmouthshire is in a sense getting a fair share of the supporting grant allocation in any event, because I think you were talking about 2 million and about 20 million, so roughly we get 10%. Well, my understanding is there are about 5 authorities in Gwent, so why aren't we getting 4 million? Why aren't we getting 20%? You know, because obviously we've still got a need to support people, and why aren't we sort of lobbying Welsh Government to say, you know, we do want a fair share of funding to assist our residents?
Okay, Chris, yeah.
Is supporting people funding allocation from Welsh Government is done via a distribution formula. Ever since I've joined Monmouthshire County Council, Welsh Government have, and if you may remember, when I first came here, I was very much involved in introducing the Equalities Act to 2010. And when I took over SP, one of the things I knew was that the distribution formula was unfair on Monmouthshire. And it's basically unfair because there is a criterion there that relates, one of the factors is the number of single older people in the area. Well, Monmouthshire's got lots of older people, but actually not proportionately as many single older people, has lots of couples. And I informed Kath Palmer from Welsh Government that we ought to be challenging the distribution formula, and there was a promise that it would be looked at, and I've sat on the committee looking at it for the last 4 years, and it's gone nowhere, to be honest. And certainly way back when, the question was, would we put in a legal challenge against the application of the formula using the Equality Act as the vehicle for that? And at that time it was decided you don't bite the hand that feeds you, in a way. We'll live with it. And there was a promise that it would be reviewed, and it's one of those reviews that's going on and on and on again. If you look at the Public Accounts Committee report, it complains in there that the allocation formula is incorrect, and that the Welsh Government should get the work group back again and get that sorted out soonest. And the assumption is that for 2020 onwards, well, for next year, 2019, they've guaranteed the SP at the levels that we've got this year. For the following year, they're saying that the SP element of whatever funding streams will be worked out by new allocation formula. And presumably some of us will be able to have a look at that and challenge it on equality basis should we need to. There are 3 options that the work group looked at, 2 of which are much better than what we've got, and one I would say was as bad. Every formula's got some pluses and some minuses.
Okay, Chris, can I just step in there? Just 1 second, Louise. When you said don't bite the hand off what feeds you, does that mean the Welsh Government said that during your meetings you were having, or was it from this building?
It was from this building.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that's nice to know. Louise?
I mean, obviously, to come back on that, I mean, I'm on the Fire Authority, and the Fire Authority charge each of the authorities according to their population. And that's what the basis is. So it's per head of population. And that would seem to be a much fairer fund. You know, that's what we, as a local authority, contribute our precept to the Fire Authority for the services that they are providing. And in a sense, in terms of the funding that we get, that would be a much fairer formula, you know, to ensure an equality of general funding per head of population. Thank you.
Could I possibly challenge that? The whole premise of supporting people is to provide support for the people who need it. Now, the needs of the people of Monmouthshire are different from the needs of people in Newport. are different from the people who apply the grant. And I think personally, I think the formula should reflect the research that has identified the need in each area, and the amount of funding that goes to each area should reflect the volume of need. And that isn't necessarily the same as per capita.
Okay.
Yeah. It could be, but not necessarily.
Yeah, well, I mean, the reason for saying that is...
There's balances.
Yeah,
I'm more interested in the ham which is going to get bitten off here, because if it's feeding us and it stops feeding us, we're going to have to bite it off, aren't we? Correct? So when do we bite it off then?
Those that know me probably know that I'm all up for a little bit of a bun fight, especially on the Equalities Act. And I think should Welsh Government get it wrong again, I would certainly be recommending that we go and say, hang on, if you don't put it right, there'll be a legal challenge. Now, I have no idea what my seniors and leaders would say to that.
Okay, so we can bear that in mind at the end. I've got Councillor Brakebrooke.
Yeah, can I come back on that?
Of course you can, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I was talking about was the sort of general grant that we get per head of population, which is about 1,000 per head for Monmouthshire residents, and it averages, we're out of 22 authorities, we're number 22. And I think that basically a similar type of allocation formula tends to be used across the board, not only in relation to the matter that you're talking about, but also in relation to, for example, support for our roads. Support for our roads, for example, isn't based on the, there is obviously that element of unfairness also within that, because we might have miles and miles more roads that needs maintenance that, aren't getting maintained. So I think I can see the argument with regard to need and equality, but, the general formula isn't giving the same average per authority anyway.
When the finance group worked through using the formula that's used to distribute revenue grants to local authorities and use that for supporting people, actually supporting people in Monmouthshire came out with extra funding, which is a bit of a surprise.
Okay. Councillor Blackburn. Councillor Blackburn.
The SP one is totally different.
Is it? All right. Well, I was assuming that it was element of the same. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Blackburn.
Thank you, Chair. Just 2 observations and 3 questions, if that's okay. Just in terms of the funding, listening to that debate, I mean, our residents are people, they're not categories, and I think you're absolutely right, it's about addressing the need, not sticking people into categories. Interesting that one of the comments you made was Welsh Government is looking to reduce the budget while claiming they are committed to supporting people. And I do hear this regularly, where Welsh Government is saying, we are committed to what you do, but you need to use your own resources because we ain't giving you any extra money. Supporting people is prevention, and we all know prevention is much better than going further down the line, much better for the person, but also for the budget, because it is more cost effective. Do you think they're reducing the budget to use that money to put more into kind of the intervention and care bit? So they're kind of pulling money from prevention into that. So that's one question. Actually, I've got another 3 now. And then the other 3 questions are, what are the risks for Monmouthshire residents under the pilot system, the super grant? Because you've highlighted some benefits, but I just want to know if there's any particular risks we need to be aware of. What are the risks to Monmouthshire residents of regionalising supporting people? I'm always concerned about this regionalisation of pots of money. I know for domestic abuse areas, we missed out on loads of money on that. And yeah, what's our capacity to meet the need out there at the moment? Sorry? What's the capacity? What capacity have we got to meet the needs out there at the moment?
Well, Chris, some questions for you.
Right. Right, regionalisation for a start. The big risk there is we are the smallest. We're disproportionately even smaller. We would get we could get swallowed up. Personally, I don't think regionalisation and super grant works. The reason behind that is if you think of the problems we would have in Monmouthshire County Council, getting agreement across the directorates, different cabinet members, and all the different funds, and then you say, right, that's difficult enough, now multiply it by 5. The big risk is nothing changes. It's just too difficult, and I'm hoping that stops regionalisation per se. Although in Gwent, we probably lead the way in doing some regional projects already. I mean, there are 5 regional contracts, 2 of which we manage on behalf of the region, and 3 of which other people manage for us. So there's a plus and minus. Domestic abuse, interestingly, sort of hot off the press, supporting people underspend has been turned around as capital grant. We put an expression of interest in and didn't really expect any great success, and we've just been told we've been offered the opportunity to go to the next stage now, and the idea is to provide a further domestic abuse resource in the south of the county, and also one that would enable children to stay in the refuge as well, which is not a facility we've got at the moment. So that's good. The risks, the risk of super grant, for me, from what I've seen, the risk seems to be about inaction. If getting to work collaboratively or in partnership amongst ourselves it will be difficult, and it needs some culture change. But if it becomes too difficult and nothing changes, that to me is the big loss. And the other risk is, I don't know if people know, for example, supporting people is probably one of the most audited programs there's ever been. We get audited, internal audit to look at all our outcomes once a year, and that's a sort of 3-week process where they go through all the returns from all the providers. And then later on in the year, we have another audit to say, have we spent the money correctly? And then later on in the year, Welsh Government come in and review what we've done and how we've done it. The risk is that those sorts of strictures remain, because actually we want to bend the rules. We want to say what's important here is Mrs. Jones's need, and if that means somebody actually goes and gets a shopping for her today, let's do it. I know we shouldn't, but let's, I don't mean break all the rules all the time, but actually getting what Mrs. Jones needs to stay in her house done is the important bit. Sorry, I'm not sure if I've answered any of your questions there.
Okay, I got Deb.
Just really come back on that. I'm hearing what you're saying, and I think that is a concern of mine, that this regionalisation, this super grant, it kind of is putting barriers there in order to respond quickly to people's needs. So we're going to be less responsive and less needs-led, I think, if we go down that route. Is there a consultation paper out at the minute that we can, contribute to in order to sort of highlight some of the issues with it?
No, not yet. The Welsh Government are employing consultants to evaluate the pathfinders, and the expectation is that they will have some consultation at that time. At the moment, they've just taken opinion, for example, from the Supporting People National Advisory Board last week.
Well, the thing is, we are staying ahead of the game here because we are looking at this in advance, and I think that's very important. Louise?
Yeah, just coming back to the issue that it's not allocated on the basis of the revenue support grant, it's dealt with in a different way. Could you explain in simple terms how we end up with 2 million out of 21 million in the Gwent region, which obviously doesn't seem to be a fair proportion, and how you think that it could be improved if they looked at it in a different way, because I'm not quite clear how they assess that. That we receive only 10% when really surely in terms of Gwent itself it should be in terms of the number of local authorities it should be more, and I would certainly support the comment that's been made about not wanting regional provision, because I think it's better and easier to have authority-based provision.
The biggest factor in there is the multiple index. I call it depravity. It's not that. It's
Deprivation.
Sorry, deprivation. Yes, that's the biggest. And Monmouthshire, if one looks at Monmouthshire in relation to Newport or Caerphilly, is not so deprived. It's more affluent. And that accounts for the biggest. That's the biggest impact factor in the formula. Plus, there's this other one of the factors around older people, and for some reason they made it related to single older people, and it seemed to me totally unnecessary, because an awful lot of the older people in Monmouthshire don't count.
Okay, right. Have we any more questions? No? Right, we've got recommendations there, Chris. Just let me get up to them on page 25. The recommendations are to approve the proposal to extend contracts due for renewal on the 1st of April 2019 for a year, so that will take us to March 2020, whilst the implications of Welsh Government decision on future funding to be made later this financial year are worked through and implemented. Have we any amendments to that, or have we anything we want to include on that as from the Select Committee?
Yeah, I think, in terms of this, we've got to add something about, integrated and flexible sort of mentality. I don't know how the best way to word this is, because obviously there's a group of funds that are mentioned there, and obviously if there is this problem of a shortfall, then we need to adopt a more integrated approach. So I think it would be useful to say that, and sort of from a contract point of view, just to be on the cautious side, it would be useful if we make sure that there are break clauses, in contracts and so forth, because obviously we're talking about a year contract, and if there's absolutely no funding whatsoever for that contract, then obviously we've got to be mindful of our budget and so forth. I don't know whether the officer has got anything to suggest to try and include those sort of things. Thank you.
Could I just stop everyone now? I did notice there's a document in this file about public domain. And now we're talking about contracts, and I just need to be clear here now. Chris, you did put a piece of paper in. I meant to mention it before. There's a piece of paper in here, exemption disclosure of documents. So and it's not signed, there's nothing on it. Was there thoughts of bringing this as exempt piece of paper to us? Or was there thoughts from legal? It's in there, it is, and it's not been filled in, because we're talking about contracts here, renewing contracts and not renewing them. I just need to be clear myself on a legal matter here, that if we're making comments about contracts and not renewing, that if we're going to include them in recommendations, we are public viewing here, and I just need to be clear, are we okay with that, Chris? Because it's on page 30, it is, of the file. Am I right? Was there thoughts about it, Chris, or it's just in there for
No, well, but that's in the standard pack. I wasn't seeking exemptions from anything. Okay. In terms of contracts, I thought the exemptions were really when I would say I didn't want to. There was a need to provide a service, and there was just one provider and I wasn't going out to tender or do a pilot, I would come to you for an exemption from using the purchasing regulations. Okay. And that's what I thought that was for. This extension is something that is quite normal and built into our normal contracts. The contracts we've got just happen to be at the moment been for the last 4 years, but most of the contracts have at some stage been extended and then recontracted 4 years ago and run out. Could I just say that you mentioned flexibility? One thing that is, I should have mentioned perhaps, is hidden within the guidelines and the grant conditions. I can submit my spend plan to Welsh Government by the 30th of January for the coming financial year. I am then allowed to vary up to 10% on any line of that spend plan without going to Welsh Government for permission to do so. So, for example, say you needed to end one contract and move the money somewhere else, you could do that as long as you didn't go over 10%. So there is flexibility built into the funding regime already. Now you were worried about us over-committing, I suspect. Perhaps you, in the recommendation, you say we could extend the contracts up to the value of the grant being awarded by Welsh Government. Which is what we do anyway. I submit a spend plan for £2.039 million by the 30th of January. That then gets put into our budget. And already, we're what, 3-4 months into the year? There have been tinkerings already on that budget and moving nearly £50,000 about just to react to current conditions.
I think Councillor Brown, I think the point he was making was if we're going to extend any contracts or overrun any contracts, that if the funding isn't forthcoming or we have issues with it, that then contracts can be broken or whatever we've got written there is stopped. I think that was your concern.
Could I say our standard contracts, which as a Welsh Government approve, actually refer to this contract is current for the duration of the period whilst Welsh Government is providing the grant funding.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's actually in the contract. So if Welsh Government were to stop, we would be stopping the contract as well.
Okay, I'm happy with that. Yeah, are you happy with
that,
Louise?
Yeah, I'm just wondering about I'm probably getting a little bit pedantic in relation to the detail, but I mean, it says to approve the proposal to extend contracts. Well, it may be that you know, as you've just said, if these contracts are going out for tender or whatever, then it's really more a question to ensure a continuation of contracts as opposed to the same ones being extended. Do you see what I mean? Because of the fact, you know, if you've got different providers.
In this context, what I meant to imply that the extension was to ensure continuity, and meant that we didn't have the need to be retendering or going out to tender in the short term, because we don't have the time to re-specify all our services and make best use of the monies we've got. We need time to look at that and consider it, and then go out to tender over the following year for 2020 onwards. This is just a recommendation to take. We got, on the one hand, we've got Welsh Government guarantee that the funding for SP for next year will be the same as this. We've got contracts in place at the moment to the value of £2.039 million. We've actually got contracts in place for slightly more, but there's a contribution from housing and children's services to supplement that. We're going to extend the SP contracts. We're proposing to extend them for a year, and during that year, Welsh Government has said they are guaranteeing SP at the current levels. And and then we've got the year on which to say, actually, the services we need are X, Y, and Z. Go out to tender, boom, boom, boom.
So really, Chairman, I think what's being said is there isn't a risk because of the guarantee of it being the same, which is obviously my concern, because I'd obviously got the wrong end of the stick with regard to uncertainties, and I think it's important that we've got that clarified. Thank you.
Will there be any amendments to this document as this final draft? Final draft goes to Cabinet?
Yeah.
Goes to Cabinet when? Okay, a few weeks.
Yes.
Okay. And who's the Cabinet member? Is it Penny?
Yeah.
Penny, okay.
Sometime before
Okay.
November.
I think what we should do as a committee is select is just make the Cabinet member aware that we are concerned about the document, and with the officers do everything possible to make sure that Monmouthshire and the constitution of Monmouthshire are with officers, we have the right funding formula in place to extend from 20 onwards. That's important, and like Chris said there, I'm not happy with don't bite the hand off what feeds you, because Chris has made it very clear as an officer there that we may have to bite that hand off, and I think we should as a select make sure that we keep an eye on this, or Chris comes back to us if we're running into complications in the near future. It's important that we don't overlook this and find and report back to us if you are sitting on this board, and making sure that we are directed with yourself, who sits on the Regional Collaborative Committee. With who? Does Penny attend that with you?
No, Nicky Newell.
Okay, that any issues which do arise, report back to the Cabinet member and come straight back to this committee if we have to, any shortfalls in funding, if things change. Are we happy with that? Yeah? Okay, have you got that, Rich? Okay, everybody happy? Right, thank you both. Thank you for your time, and we got there in the end, yes? Thank you. Okay, Steve? Right, agenda item number 6, private sector housing loan scheme, change of terms. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, Steve, we've got a couple of members in for Powis, just looking over us, scrutiny. Steve, away you go.
Okay.
The floor's yours.
Thank you, Chair, for inviting me. Good afternoon. I'm Steve Griffiths. I work for I'm a strategy and policy officer, and I work for the housing department. The paper before you really is a report just to highlight the changes that are happening to the two loan schemes that we run in Monmouthshire. In fact, these run throughout Wales. It's the empty homes loan scheme and the home improvement loan scheme. The key issues behind this is that a lot of authorities have had success in one scheme and haven't been so successful in the other, and vice versa. And Welsh Government tried to look at, see how they could sort of even this out, and both schemes became more successful. Now, under the old scheme, we had two regimes basically. We had a grant scheme, but it's the same as under the new proposal basically, but we had a grant scheme that came into a loan, a grant stream of money that came into the council as a grant. And then we also had a loan scheme from Welsh Government that came into as a loan that needs to be paid back to Welsh Government by the year 2030. Now, it looked as though Welsh Government looked at this, and they decided that one stream is for empty properties, and the other stream is to help improve properties in the private rented sector, home improvement loan schemes. And it was targeted, the home improvement loan schemes were targeted at applicants who probably couldn't access loans in the private market, in the commercial market. So it was targeted at a very narrow section. And Welsh Government looked at it and thought to themselves, and I probably agree with this as well, that the very people that we wanted to help under the Home Improvement Loan Scheme, we were being tied, basically, our hands were being tied because we had to do affordability tests. Because we had to pay the money back to Welsh Government by 2015 as well, we had to make sure that there was no bad, that the risk was minimised to the people we were trying to help. So Welsh Government found that the people we were really trying to help weren't being helped because they were failing our own. So they couldn't go to the commercial market. They couldn't come to us because they were failing our affordability test. So what they basically decided to do was that they wanted the more riskier loans and the ones that we wouldn't be able to help, they wanted to have that money paid to them from the grant. Now the grant money is the money that's given to us in perpetuity, really. It's for us to use, and as long as we use it, there is a mechanism for them to call it back. But if we use it and we keep recycling it, it's there until they decide they want to pull it. It hasn't got to be paid back to Welsh Government by 2030. So they decided that all risky loans ought to come out of that particular pot of money. And then what we're able to do then is for those then who fail our affordability tests, they are able then to have what we were able to give them loans on a equity release loan on their properties. Because all these loans are for private sector housing type loans. So in a nutshell, what we're trying to do is trying to help those, especially I heard Chris saying about Monmouthshire being a county of older people. I think I've heard it been said that Monmouthshire is an asset-rich, cash-poor county, where a lot of the money is in the property. These properties, these houses are older type houses, and are, not all of them, but a lot of them are in need of upgrading. The owners can't, because they can't access loans in the commercial sector. They couldn't come to us because they might possibly fail an affordability test, and basically then we won't be able to help them. Now, under the new terms, they're able to access money on an equity release basis, what we call property appreciation loans. So they're able to borrow the money, have the work done that is required on their property, and then pay the money back to us at some event, some lifetime event in the future, either the death of the owner or the sale of the property. That, in a nutshell, I think would be how to describe the change. Now, those property appreciation loans in we never offered them in the past. So that is new. That's something that's new we want to introduce in Monmouthshire. Other authorities, I think very few authorities, though I would say, but have introduced them through other means. But it's something that I think a great majority of local authorities in Wales haven't been or weren't prepared to do. But this new lending mechanism now allows us to do that. We're still offering loans to empty properties owners. That's still there, but they now, whereas that came out of the grant money, that now is going to come out of the repayable loan money, so that we will have to eventually pay that money back to Welsh Government. The two loan streams in total came to £1.2 million. It's roughly split 50-50, so that 50% of it is grant and stays with the council. 50% of it is a loan from the Welsh Government that will be paid back to Welsh Government by 2030.
Okay. And I did note on here that the shortfall, the shortfall, the Welsh Government will be the beneficiary of that if there's any shortfall, correct?
Up to 2.5%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
There is a bad debt provision where this is on the loan element now gets repaid.
Thanks, Steve. Any questions? Jane?
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, we have discussed at length in the past the number of empty houses that are in Monmouthshire. And also we've looked at, I think, in depth, the economics of this county and how many homes we're going to need in the future to actually be able to house everybody. And it's, we've got a massive shortfall to make up. How is this realistically going to, what sort of numbers are we talking about? Do you hope will bring empty homes, for example, back into use by this scheme over, say, the next 5 years?
Well, that is the million-dollar question, because at the moment we're having difficulty selling the loan scheme. We're hoping that on average the amount of loans being lent, about 10,000, roughly throughout Wales, about £10,000. So that, if you divided that into 600,000, that would be theoretically be available, and they have 5 years to pay that off. We could recycle that, so that's what's that? 600 homes, is it? 60 homes? No, yeah, 60 homes, isn't it? So we're looking at bringing back 60. Theoretically, if the money was swallowed up and they spent the average, then we're looking at bringing back 60 homes over the length of the loan period, which could be up to 5 years.
I mean, thank you. Yeah, I was just going to say that is just, really in the scheme of things, anything helps, but we've got an awful long way to go.
In meeting the number of affordable homes required for Monmouthshire, this isn't it's not the panacea for that, but it is a small step towards that.
And the £10,000 isn't very far, is it? No. Not nowadays.
No.
Not to bring a home back who's somebody going to actually just give him that push or then that push to say £10,000 actually goes nowhere nowadays. Councillor Edwards, and then Councillor Blaber, and then Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, 10,000 won't go far, and especially in Monmouthshire, where a lot of the housing, is top of the tree. There are a lot of old properties, and when it comes to old properties and doing those and get them up as to a certain standard does cost an awful lot more. And also, perhaps the public out there don't know enough about the loans and the grants. And when I was reading through it this morning, and it said that in the foreseeable future, if the person who was borrowing the money died, then it would go back. But what about the family that are in there? Because obviously the house would have to be sold, presumably. So there's a lot of different ways of interpreting. And also, all the time that I've been on this council, 14 years now, in the beginning we were doing a working group looking at all the vacant houses in the county, and some were saying, well, if we want to keep our aunt's house empty, well, we want to keep it empty. But also now, it's on the news all the time about big stores closing down. Why can't we do more about the shops that are empty, or they're in charity shops on the high street? People want to live in a built-up area. All the amenities are there, and we cannot keep on building outside of the towns when you've got, empty shops, and the facilities are there that could be taken on board to persuade perhaps some of the landlords to convert them into flats or something like that. It shouldn't just be houses per se that we can lend to because we've got a big demand for housing in the county that we don't seem to be achieving much headway on.
With regards to the figure of £10,000, that was an average. They can borrow for empty properties up to 25. It's just shown that most refurbishments for an empty property tend to lie between that figure, around about 10k. But they could borrow. With regards to then people living in the property, the empty property is there for, it's an empty property. So theoretically, they are living elsewhere. So that property will be, that loan will be available to them until it's reoccupied. if it's empty property and they take out a 5-year loan, they can have it occupied in that time through renting it out, or they can sell it. And if it's sold,
you take the money back.
We take the money. If it's rented, we take the money then from the rent, or can do.
Okay. Right, Steve. Councillor Brown and then Councillor Blayborough.
Sorry, just with regard then to the empty shop, well, it's not so much the empty shops, but I think that's an issue around change of use and all that, but certainly yes. on flats above it, the loans are also targeted developers, so landlord developers. So if it's a landlord that saw a row of empty flats above shops, then I wanted to purchase them, they could come and borrow the money off us to do them up. And if they bought, or there were buildings that had, say, they can borrow up to 125k, or was it 150k, to do so it's basically a multiplier of 25 £25 per property.
But do we publicise it enough?
We tend, normally we do press releases, and I usually do letter drops on empty property owners twice a year, to which A, asking them why their property is empty, and B, advertising the loans that we offer.
Because I don't go on social network, but presumably everything's on Facebook, so perhaps that would be the way to go.
Yeah, and it's a lot of information. There will be information on our website. That's another thing. That's another site I'm actually in the process of building up. So the information is going to be on there.
Okay, Councillor Brown.
Yeah, it seems, quite a complex system from what you've been saying, because obviously, you're talking about whether or not, people who can't afford commercial loans and so forth. What type of people and circumstances take up these loans, and would it be... I can see it being a greater success if, say, for example, there was interest-free loans, and not necessarily for property developers, but just on a one-off basis, and make sure that it was paid back, as opposed to, the complicated system of eligibility. Because that might be something that would put people off in any event, and wouldn't necessarily help resolve the empty property situation.
The two loans, there's the empty property loan, or both loans, or all loans, where are interest-free. My apologies for admitting that probably is an important point. Yeah, they are interest-free loans. They're offered to all, but there are varying degrees depending on the product, as I've said, of an admin fee. So that they're not completely free of charge. Yeah, it is saying that. It says on the report. Yeah. There is an eligibility, and it will be based around the affordability of that applicant. Now, if it's an empty property owner, then there's a degree that they're living elsewhere, and that's an inheritance. So we were not looking at their affordability issues per se. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, right? But what we're looking at then on the other side of the coin, those who live in their properties and want their properties refurbished and unable to access. There is no eligibility, or very little eligibility criteria for them, because they would be able to have a loan based on the a property appreciation loan, based on an equity release. So now this is new, and this is at the very beginning. I'm trying to figure out, I suppose, eligibility then will be based around the current value of the property, what they want to borrow, and then what is the forecasted rise in its appreciation then over the length of the loan, or over the length. It's not their income. It's not their income. Oh, right. There's no income involved on the property appreciation side, the loan side of it.
So in other words, if a property was empty and they wanted to get a loan for it.
It's not about empty homes. This is about... This is about empty property. This is about empty homes. This is about... This is about empty homes. 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 This is about
So on an empty home, how would this operate then?
Okay, we're clear with that one now? Yeah. Okay, Councillor Barbara. You don't want to speak?
I guess I've read the report, hearing what you're saying. There's an element of, right, so this new lending mechanism allows us to be more flexible and lend more people money. And there's an element of me saying, so what, really? What is the purpose of this? I would like to think the purpose is to reduce empty homes so that people have got a roof over their head and we can reduce the homelessness figures. That would be a so what for me. So I'm struggling with it. But just, well, if you've got an answer, that'd be great. But just going on to the next question, then you can answer them together as quick.
It's as though you can get a loan to do your home where you probably wouldn't be able to get one elsewhere, and explain.
I kind of get it.
There are two elements. Yes, there's that for the empty home loan. Could that address our homelessness problem? To a degree, a small degree. Can it address the number of affordable homes we have in the county? Yes, but to a very small degree.
Right.
That's on the one side. Then you have on the other side, you have the owner-occupier who lives in a property that they're unable, that requires a lot of work. I think someone gave an example earlier on with Christmas year that the house was falling down almost.
I think that was Jane, yeah.
Yeah. Now, that's the type of person probably wouldn't be able to access commercial loans and would need some help to. Now, these loans are available. Interest, not yet. Well, there is a degree of slight appreciation, but they're able to have that loan without the worry of paying that back until sometime in the future. That's right. So that would then go to help then the standard of the private rented sector homes in Monmouthshire.
Okay. Yeah.
Especially the older type as well. That are older properties. I mean, there's a lot of new build going on in Monmouthshire, but there's a lot of properties that are a lot older, the older type, and require work to it.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Okay. No, that makes sense.
Ruth,
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you identify throughout the county, are there more empty homes or homes needing refurbishment in built-up areas or in rural areas? Because I know a couple in my area that are either empty or got quite a few bachelors living on their own, and so they don't see the point of really doing anything. And so it's becoming quite dilapidated, and one in particular is a listed house. And I worry then that, yes, he is, as you say, asset rich but cash poor, and also then because they get older they don't see the point of doing anything about it, and then that would take a colossal amount of money to bring it up to any sort of standard. So I was wondering, is there more evidence of that in the countryside than in a built-up area?
Taking the empty property part of it, we are able, and we've just started to do it, and I think I brought a report to you not so long back with regard to the identification of empty properties within Monmouthshire. We are able now to identify where they are. I mean, we're always able to identify them from an address, but pictorially we can have an idea of where they are and where most of them are. And there will be a targeted approach to these empty properties. Certainly around areas, by looking at the maps, we're able to identify areas where we think the more affordable properties are, and targeted them for sale, just either for them to sell them, empty property, or for them to offer them up as rent at a more affordable rent, rather than going on the open market. So we are able to identify and target now through our GIS colleagues.
Do you have conversations then with the owners of these people, or do you just let it drop and hope that they'll come to you?
No, the idea is, we used to, yes, but now we've got this GIS that we will be making more targeted approaches on them and approaching them.
Okay.
was just going to say, just with regard to the person who probably lives in a property that is in need of the work to being doing to it. Well, first and foremost, I think we could pick up what Chris was saying here. We wouldn't know about that unless they came forward. Now, support workers could do that.
I was just going to make that point.
Yeah.
He's made the point I was going to make.
Support workers could make that connection, and then through that, then an application could be made.
Can I just add very
Yeah, quickly, and then Councillor.
Yeah, just very quickly, just to say that, we're talking about future generations, we're talking about well-being, we're talking about people working together, and yet it's not happening. I was horrified that there was a property like that on my ward where somebody hasn't got even basic sanitary facilities, and yet we've got people going in there, social workers, etc. So I really think we need to have much better working so that people are aware that these grants are these loans are available.
Loans or grants, depending on which.
Councillor Blainborough, last one.
Last one. I suppose it's kind of my question summarises the discussions that I've been having here, really, because you were saying that you were having difficulty in selling the loan scheme, and so my questions, which you've partly answered, why do you think people aren't taking up these opportunities, and really what strategy have you got in place to address this? And you've started answering that, really.
Yeah, it's a million dollar question. With regard, yeah, that well may be it. With regard to the MDO issue, we always get a lot of initial enthusiasm, and whether or not they're risk averse and they just don't particularly want to take on any loan at all, whether it's interest free or coming in, then that may be an issue. The other issue with all these loans, especially if you're talking of small numbers, is that they're subject to a charge being placed on them. That's one of our risk mitigation methods. That's off-putting as well. Unfortunately, we can't do anything about that because we have to be able to obviously mitigate our risk as well. But I think that is also off-putting.
Yeah, I understand that.
Regarding then those who live in properties that require their home improvement, again, always initial enthusiasm, but they never go to that next step. Again, that could be down because of the charge as well. Do you want to borrow £6,000, £7,000, £8,000 and put a charge on it, or even 10,000? You know what I mean? Others, we're at a loss. We do, and I think that's seen throughout. There are areas in Wales, don't get me wrong, that seem to have nailed it. Blind Eye Gwent would be one of them. I think our colleagues from Powys have been quite successful. Yeah, in those.
It'd be good to sort of learn from others then as to what they're doing.
And how we really don't know what the difference is. Risk averseness, probably.
Okay. Louise, last
Yeah,
one. It's got to
just
be
a
last
very,
one
very
because,
quick, just a very quick
we
one.
are running
Is
out
that
of
if
time.
you place it, obviously in terms of securing the loan, if you place a charge on a property, does the say for example it was 10,000, will the charge actually say, because it's supposed to be interest free, will the charge remain at 10,000 regardless of property appreciation or not?
With regard to the
And any interest, yeah.
no interest, if it's under the Hill scheme, under the home improvement, under the loan stream. So I got to get myself confident. It's totally free. What you borrow today and you pay back in 5 years' time, it's whatever you borrow, other than the admin fee. Okay, that is the admin. Under the PAL scheme, which is the property appreciation scheme, that is dependent. The empty properties not under the PAL. PAL is property appreciation loans, the equity release, only targeted at those who live in their property and require their properties to be refurbished. So your empty property loan, that will be if you borrow 10,000 at the end of the borrowing period, it's 10,000 you pay back.
Oh, I see. Even if the property's gone up.
Even if the property's gone up. Property appreciation though, for those who can't really afford to go outside and get to the commercial market, yes, there is an element of appreciation. But to be honest with you, I've just started looking to that, and I'm not sure how that works. I'm still a bit green under the ear about that, I'm sorry.
Right, I do have one more question, and that's Councillor Blaiborough, and I'm going to round up because there's a recommendation here.
It's kind of a recommendation. I'm just wondering, would you be able to maybe talk to people from Powys, Blaen, Gwent, find out what they do, and perhaps put a strategy together? I guess I'm getting a feel that you have a way of working and that's not working and that's it, but I might be hearing you wrong, and maybe putting a strategy would be a good idea.
Yes, and to be fair, and I think it's still in existence, well, it is in existence to a degree, we used to work regionally. This is something, under the empty properties issue, we used to work regionally with the five South East Wales local authorities. We still that was across the empty homes and the hills, and it was the same in other. And Blaen a Gwent, Powys didn't, but Blaen a Gwent used to sit with us, and we used to talk to them. It didn't seem something that was transferable, that they were doing anything different, because we all did it the same way. It just seemed that the citizens of Blaen a Gwent were less risk averse.
But that doesn't to say, Steve, that because Blaen a Gwent, or our neighbouring authorities, the Gwent region, are different, it may be Powys or Denbighshire actually ticking the boxes on this. So it may be we do the piece of work with them and probably implement something in ours which may kickstart it a little bit differently. Am I right? So you're talking about a recommendation on that line?
And I think, and what we have now is a bigger...
I will allow. Yeah, no problem.
What we've done is we've had basically like a business breakfast, and we've invited plumbers, electricians, builders, homeowners, any business to it, and we've put this grant to them because the builders, the plumbers know the houses that might need the work. And they want the work. So we've done sort of like the Powys Pound, trying to encourage them to do the work in the county, and by where they know people have got problems. And the other thing that we've done quite a bit of, well, I have, is I've left leaflets in places like solicitors where people are going to buy homes, where they can see. Probate or something. So I wasn't trying to interfere. I'm very sorry. But it was just it was a suggestion. We've had some early ones at 7 a.m, and we've had some later ones in an evening where they just have coffee and biscuits. Morning they've had bacon rolls, and it's been something we could get them to. We've had 2 or 3 agencies, not just yours, looking into business as well. So it was just an idea.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Well, I think that gives us something to go at with the recommendation, to be honest. I think how we word it will be important, but this is going to Cabinet very soon, isn't it, just to endorse this?
Individual.
Okay, so how about we do this then? 2.1, to consider the implications of the introduction of the new criteria, terms and conditions for the delivery of the private sector loans in Monmouthshire, and to make recommendations to the Cabinet as appropriate. Also, that we work more collaboratively with other authorities within Wales and look at agencies and look at ways of extending and having more influence on the take-up of the loan scheme. In brackets, Powys County Council, in brackets, somebody else, because we've heard of examples of it working. There's one there from Angela. Perhaps there are others out there as well. And perhaps because we're being too, give me the word, enclosed within the Gwent region, it may be we get out of the Gwent region to look at a way of delivering. Full stop?
Yeah.
Okay, everybody happy with that?
Yeah.
Right, okay, Steve. Thank you very much, sir. Have you got that, Rich? Right, thank you. Let's go on to agenda item number 10. We've done 9. Council and Cabinet Business Work Programme. And I think for the ladies from Powys, this is the important one, because this gives us an idea of where we are with the plan with the council. Members, have you anything on there? I see Crick Roads on there again, which is one which this group is really interested in, but I'm led to believe of Hazel that that has been deferred again, but it doesn't say in the planner that it's been deferred. It's up in July, am I right? 6th of July, I haven't got it up here now. So I will confirm that with Hazel, that they promised to bring Crick Road business case back to us. Is it 6th of July, anyone? Say me.
What for cabinet?
For cabinet planner, no, the planner for the work on Crick Road. Just a second. Now Hazel has left me a note here before she left as well. I just need to confirm with you as a committee also. Let's have a look. Crick Road. Oh gosh, let me have a look here now. Crick Road business case. 4th of July. There you go. And that is Colin Richins. Yeah, 4th of July. I think that's been deferred. If it hasn't, Hazel's going to have to bring that to you, or we'll have to bring that to you quite quickly, because the final business case they promised to bring back here. Claire Marchant's Chief Officer report we took yesterday. I see nothing else in there on that planner for us to be interested in reference to adults services. There's a few on there for children. Any cross-cutting issues there, Martin, that you feel, if you've got something there, you've got Children's Services annual report. If there's anything there actually cross-cuts, can you let us know? Because i.e. yesterday, our meeting with the officers was cross-cutting, so if there's anything there, I don't see anything on there. Okay, now Hazel's, have you happy with ours committee yet? Yeah. Okay, Hazel's just left me a quick note, and I'll read it through for you because it's quite important.